There are essentially two archetypes that I'd like to discuss here. Two archetypes that capture, in many ways, how we can cognitively reconstruct and hence create our reality. The two archetypes are the benefit finder and the fault finder. First of all, the fault finder. The fault finder is a person who always focuses on things that don't work, on the peanut butter and jelly, on things that are not going well, on problems in the relationships, on problems in him or herself, problems with the job, the consummate complainer. Now, we all exist on the continuum of between extreme fault finding and extreme benefit finding. You know, there's no one who is all the way on the extreme this way or that way. Everyone is on somewhere on the continuum, and what I'm going to argue for is to move a little bit more from the fault finding toward the benefit finding, because there are many benefits to it that I'll discuss later. The fault finder, I got the name from the work of Henry David Thoreau. The fault finder will find faults even in paradise. The extreme fault finder experiences resignation, learned helplessness. Why? Because he or she begins to really believe that the terrible reality is very much out there, independent of what he or she thinks, not recognizing that they create that reality. They begin to believe that no matter what they do, no matter what job they find, they have a terrible boss. No matter what partner they have, they're always awful and inconsiderate. No matter what restaurant they go to, the service is always awful. And they always keep on getting the same peanut butter and jelly sandwich that they made for themselves. And they resigned to the reality, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, of course, their existence. A fault finder makes lemonade out of lemons. Makes lemon out of lemonade. The benefit finder, research Julian Bauer, now at UCLA. The benefit finder is the opposite, focuses on what works. The benefit finder looks on the bright side of life, finds the silver lining in a dark cloud, makes lemonade out of lemons, and doesn't fault an instructor for using too many cliches. The benefit finder finds the miracle in the common. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a consummate benefit finder, focusing on the positive, on what works. Now, the problem here may be that the benefit finder may be detached. This is one of the criticisms of people who always see the bright side of life. And that is a problem, if that is the case. Again, this class is not advocating focusing only on the positive. It's advocating reality. And reality comprises both good and bad. Reality comprises both geometric shapes and children on the bus. And the key is to focus on both. So the detached benefit finder is certainly not an archetype that I would advocate, nor would it lead to mental health in the long run. There's a need, in the words of Nathaniel Branden, to respect reality. We don't create reality simply by the focus. However, we are co-creators. Let me read you extensively from William James. Now, however fixed these elements of reality may be, we still have a certain freedom in our dealings with them. Take our sensations. That they are is undoubtedly beyond our control, but which we attend to, note, and make emphatic in our conclusions depends on our own interests, and, according as we lay the emphasis here or there, quite different formulations of truth result. We read the same facts differently. Waterloo, with the same fixed detail, spells a victory for an Englishman. For a Frenchman, it spells defeat. So for an optimist philosopher, the universe spells victory. For a pessimist, defeat. What we say about reality thus depends on the perspective into which we throw it. William James said this back in 1890, in understanding how we co-create our reality. This is one of my favorite poems by R.L. Sharp. Isn't it strange how princes and kings and clowns that caper in sawdust rings and common people like you and me are builders for eternity? Each is given a list of rules, a shapeless mass, a bag of tools, and each must fashion ere life is flown a stumbling block or a stepping stone. Very often what we get at the beginning is a large piece of stone. What do we do with it? Do we create it into a beautiful David, chipping away the excess stone, or is it a barrier to our success? And very often it is up to us as we co-create our reality. The stone is there. We're not responsible for it, but what we do with it, we are responsible for. Cognitive reconstruction is about learning to interpret things optimistically. In other words, in a positive light. Anne Harbison, colleague of mine, used to teach also with Philip Stone, said that never let a good crisis go to waste. Crises have the potential for growth. One of the books that we'll talk about when we talk about relationships is Passionate Marriage by David Schnark, who talks about crucibles in marriage. And what he says is that the thriving relationships are relationships not that have been, all fine and dandy for years. These usually fail after a while. But the relationships that go through crucibles, that have crises, disagreements, and then, thesis, antithesis, and then there is a synthesis, then there is growth as a result of these hardships. And he says that there is no other way. Again, learn to fail or fail to learn. There is no other way for long-term success of a relationship. A relationship cannot look like this. It has to have the ups and downs. Never let a good crisis in a relationship go to waste. That doesn't mean that every crisis needs to be resolved, and there are some that could end and should end a relationship. But most crises can be solved and need to be dealt with. Same on an individual level. Work by Warren Bennett. He's from USC, taught for a few years here at the business school, has identified the leading leaders, whether it's young ones, whom he called the geeks, the 30-year-olds, or the old ones, the geezers, he called them. He has a book called Geeks and Geezers, where he talks about the differences between the two leadership styles, approaches, passions, interests, and there are numerous differences. For example, the geeks, the young ones, talk about work-life balance. The geezers don't know what he means by that. It was usually a man worked while the woman took care of the family and the man. So that was for the geezers, for the older generation. The younger generation, they talk about work-life balance and how they can incorporate all the elements of their lives. There are, of course, many more women in the geeks than the geezers. Numerous differences among the generation. One similarity. All the great leaders, whether they were 30-year-old or 85 years old, all of them had been through very rough crucibles and lived to tell the tale. Now, most people go through crucibles, but there are certain people who are able to find benefit in these crucibles and grow as a result. Never let a good crisis go to waste, whether it's professionally, whether it's interpersonally, whether it's intrapersonally, in terms of what you're experiencing. About 4 years ago or 5 years ago, when I was still a resident tutor in Leverett House, we had one of these pre-business events where we talked about the upcoming year and the recruiting and so on. That particular year was a terrible year. Goldman Sachs was laying off, wasn't recruiting on campus. Credit Suisse, First Boston, they were laying off as well. Deutsche Bank, first time in its history, was laying off employees. Really bad market. And we talked about this. Each of us gave a spiel about the market and what they can do. Very, very somber presentation. And then one of my students, Shane Fitzcoy, was a senior then, was sitting there, had studied positive psychology there, put up his hand and said, Tal, you portrayed a very pessimistic and negative picture, but as the teacher of positive psychology, can you maybe shed some optimism here? And, a few chuckles in the audience and then silence. And everyone is looking at me and I don't know what to say. And my immediate reaction was to say, well, Shane, things happen for the best. Exactly. And then, just before it came out of my mouth, I thought to myself, actually, I don't believe that. I don't believe that things happen for the best. But while I don't believe that things happen for the best, I do believe that some people are able to make the best of things that happen. And there's a very big difference here. Because when I say, I'm not happy about what just happened here, I don't like it, I much rather have the market be a good market, where people are hiring, where they'll come to me on a silver platter and offer me a job. Of course, I would much rather have that. So things don't happen for the best necessarily. But there are some people who accept the situation and then are able to make the best of it. The same with any crisis. Do you think the leaders, whether the 80 and 90-year-olds, invited those crucibles into their lives, wanted these crucibles to happen? Do you think partners go into a relationship and say, let's look for that crucible, let's really fight so that we can have a healthy relationship? Of course not. But when it happens, that's when they make the best of it. Stuff happens. And we can either let it pollute or make fertilizer out of it. I want to show you an example, once again, of a leader who is a consummate benefit finder.
Madiba, Mandela, Nelson, people love, so the message is strong. Let's raise our voices, let's raise our voices, let's raise and the messenger. Yeah, people love you.
Wow. We are honored to be talking with Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, whose unshakable courage, his faith and integrity have inspired millions to see what is possible in their own lives. I've had the pleasure, the honor of meeting Mr. Mandela on a couple of occasions before, and I will tell you, to be in his presence is really, to be in your presence is like being in the presence of royalty and grace at the same time. I wonder, how does a man spend 27 years in prison, put there by an oppressor, and come out of that experience with not a heart of stone, not a cold heart, but a heart that is willing to forgive and embrace? I remember talking to you one night over dinner, and you had said to me that our hatred for the oppressor was so intense we did not see the value of talking to him. So at what point did you see the value of letting go of the hatred and begin the process of talking?
Well, let me say first that it's a great tragedy to spend the best of your life in prison. But although it looks ironical, There are advantages in that. If I had not been to prison, I would not have been able to achieve the most difficult task in life, and that is changing yourself. I would not have had that opportunity. I had that opportunity because in prison, you have what we don't have in our work outside prison. The opportunity to sit down and think, which is an important part.
Did you need 27 years of it, though? You could have taken a few days, a week, a vacation. Did you need 27 years?
Now, did it happen for the best that he spent 27 years of his life? Certainly when he experienced it, it was painful, it was awful, but he was able to transform this. And to even in that situation to see the positive. And when we transformed it, those who know the history of what happened to him, when he started to look at the positive even there, at the opportunities in prison, when he changed his mindset, in other words, not the external circumstances, the external circumstances actually began to change. Another benefit finder. A pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity, an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. And you don't want to argue with him.